And we are live! Greetings and salutations for this fantastic world building podcast live. I am very, very excited because we are talking about running horror at the RPG table. And I have the experts with me as always. Please welcome to the podcast Wolfgang Baur from Kobold Press and Celeste Connowitch from Kobold Press. Folks, are you feeling spooky today?
Yes, always. I've got my spiderweb attire. I'm constantly ready for Halloween with my wardrobe, so I'm always willing to talk horror.
Celeste is bringing the spook. How about you, Wolfgang? Are you feeling spooky today?
Oh no. Sorry, no audio.
Oh no, we've lost Wolfgang on the audio.
What's going on? I got no audio.
Really spooky.
I'm just going to mute him for a moment while he figures out his audio side, and then we'll get him unmuted and we'll move ahead. So let me take this moment to introduce my guests, who are far too modest and far too fabulous to introduce themselves. The currently silent Wolfgang Baur is one of the biggest names in tabletop gaming, as well as the head of Kobold Press over at the head Kobold over at Kobold Press. He's also worked on Tyranny of Dragons, Wizards of the Coast, Kobold Press, Courts of the Shadow Fae, Book of Ebb and Tides, Kobold Press Guide to Dragons. We love some dragons. The Labyrinth Hopping setting and more. He's currently working on outlines and schemes for upcoming secret spoopy projects that we may not know about, for they are under NDA. And Celeste Connowitch is a Seattle-based game designer and performer. When not plotting behind the GM screen, you can catch her writing for Kobold Press as their senior game designer, or hear her on the Venture Maidens Actual Play podcast. You can keep up with her on socials and everywhere else at C. Connowitch, which is spelt with one N, not with two N's, as it was spelt in the preview. That was entirely my fault, and I apologize.
It's a difficult global name. It's basically a made-up name. It's hard. It's hard to go for.
All words are made up eventually.
But it's got witch in it, which is the most important part. Really.
There we are. So you are absolutely ready for the spook. Let's have a look. So, you guys have the Night Hunters Kickstarter out right now. How is it going? She says, pretending she does not know the answer.
It's going wonderfully right now. We were just, I have wanted to make like a gothic horror or horror product for us, for Tales of the Valiant for such a long time. Because if there's one thing Kobold Press is known for, it's really scary monsters. So I was absolutely delighted, one, when we got to do this project, and two, unleash it on the masses, because clearly all of the kobolds were ready for horror. So yeah, we're a couple weeks now into the Kickstarter and things are rolling along. We've unlocked a bunch of stretch goals and we've got a lot more exciting stuff to come, including Janet. I feel like, was there something that you might have contributed?
Yes, the reason I've been watching so carefully is that I have a stretch goal, which is very exciting. Wolfgang, we can now hear you, by the way.
Yes, and I can hear you. I had a moment of horror where everything was silent and I felt isolated from the world.
The anticipation, the isolation.
We were cornered in a room and there were spooky noises.
Yes.
Critical to horror.
Very appropriate. So yes, I wrote one of the adventures that is coming out. It's one of the stretch goals. It's called A Kiss of the Lich Queen. I am very excited to share more once it has been unlocked. But there's a lot of quintessentially Janet stuff in there. Spooky theaters, scary opera singers.
We did have a Discord person who was like, I'm not sure I want to know what a kiss from a Lich Queen is like, but I'm excited for it anyway. Take my money.
Yes.
I have to say, sorry, go ahead.
The adventure portion of this is just top notch, and we're really thrilled with the level of authors and designers we brought in, including you, of course. But yes, I mean, we wanted to take sort of the regular world of tabletop fantasy and horrify people. So that took a special touch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually a great place to launch into the sort of the craft approach for today, because D&D and Tales of the Valiant, D&D forks, as it were, they're not at their core horror games, but they can be with a few little tweaks. And this is what I love. The way that you've approached Night Hunters, this is why I really wanted to cover this topic with you guys, because, with some expert inspiration and some like little system modules that you can slide in there, it can really work. So can we start with what elements of horror already work great with RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons and Tales of the Valiant?
Sure. I mean, on the one hand, they're big heroic games, right? We have the heroic character coming in, and in some ways that works. In other ways, horror works best when the heroes are somewhat incompetent or limited in what they can do. So this is one of the obstacles, is overcoming all that magic, all the super items, all the powers and abilities. Um, but the nice thing about horror in RPGs or tabletop RPGs is some of those things are contingent, right?
Mm.
Let's take clerics for a moment, right? The priest who does the exorcism and drives away the demon. If suddenly, in a D&D context, they pray for their spells and all the spells above a certain level don't show up, that's a moment of, wait a minute, what just changed,
Yeah.
right? So the way I think elements of horror work in existing RPGs, sometimes there's something you have to take away at the beginning and have a bit of a reset, a power reset, and an expectations reset that the things you think work don't work anymore.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, and what is nice too, because when you are talking about Tales of the Valiant or, Dungeons and Dragons, these are high fantasy games, high fantasy coded, baked
Oh, the
right
monsters
in,
are in.
right into the heart of it, right? So you already have these great extremes that exist within the game. You already have things like necromancers and undead and demons, right, at your disposal. So it's all there. I feel like horror is just a matter of turning the dials up or down on certain things. So we already have concepts, good and evil. These big concepts exist within high fantasy. But in a horror game, what you're doing is kind of cranking up the evil dial there, and then you're muting the good guy dial, right, on this side. If you disproportionately, make those evil forces more of a thing in your game, and you lessen, the resources, the good factions, the knights in shining armor, if they aren't as there in your world, then it has to be on the characters, right? And setting those things up, it's such a great toolbox to play in, right? In a game where there are dark curses and big spells and horrific things that can happen, there's already a lot to love baked right into high fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. So going on from that, what do you think is at the heart of an RPG horror story? Like, what is the beating heart of these adventures, and how do we sort of put them together?
Well, there's at least two ways to go. I know
Yeah.
Celeste has her answer and I have mine. I
And
think,
that's amazing.
right? Like, I think about this usually in the context of opponents and player emotion. And the emotion I'm driving for in horror is usually fear, right?
Mm.
The invulnerable heroic guy with all the powers. And I just said this earlier, right? When their magic sword's glow dims, and they're like, what do you mean my magic sword is only +1 now? That's a moment of player fear because you're taking away their sense of mastery. You're taking away their toolkit. You're making them lesser. And that's scary because part of the reason people play power trip heroic fantasy is to feel powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pull that back, there's a moment of fear there. The other thing that sort of drives fear as an emotion in horror is the unknown. And we may talk about this in a broader sense, but if you know what an orc is and you know what a zombie is, but the thing you're facing is not an orc or a zombie, and none of your usual responses work, that's also a moment of player fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of not having mastery, fear of, I don't know what to do. Right? I'm a big darn hero and I don't have the answer. So I'm driving for that moment, and I don't want it to last too long as a game master or a designer. I don't want them to feel powerless the whole game. That's no fun at all. But going from, oh, stuff has turned south to, hey, we're figuring out an answer. That's a fun horror moment.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts on this one, Celeste?
Yeah, for me, I think at the heart of the horror stories that I love most is the concept of like redemption. And that can come from a few different places, right? I think one of the most fun things for me playing horror or running a horror game is opening up to the players and allowing them to pick characters that might not be your typical heroes, right? At the beginning, maybe you are just the villager who everybody dies, right, in a werewolf attack, and all of a sudden your life is changed, right? And you have to do something to survive. Or maybe you are, our new lineage, the grave rat, right? And you were made by someone else from the parts, these corpses of the dead, and now you have this new life. Your soul has been rebound to this world, and you have to figure out what to do. Maybe you were the monster and you were freed from a curse, and now all of a sudden you have to make amends. These kind of stories, what I love about horror is it just really zooms in the camera on the players, right? In high fantasy, it's always larger than life. It's big. Everything is so big. But horror, at the end of the day, is about that moment you feel, the way your emotions are processing, that moment of fear when it's just you whispering in the dark and a single candle, right? Like it's so focused on those stories and what is going on, and also from the villain side too. I love villain redemption stories. Like, how do we get the villains that are so bad they've become the gothic horror villains, right? How do we get there? And unraveling those stories and watching the characters unravel this, for me, that's the heart of horror adventures.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to sort of add to that, one of the big things about all the horror stories that I love, and I think about things like Edgar Allan Poe when I think of this as well, is there is a heart of darkness. There is something has gone terribly wrong in a very human way. And that's what makes it monstrous. So there's a wonderful book by Christopher Booker called The 7 Basic Plots. And as he unpacks the first half is great, ignore the second half. The second half is dreadful, don't read it. It's all dreadful, sexist Jungian analysis. It gets very problematic. But the first half is excellent. And he talks about, the monster, like overcoming the monster. And everything he says the monster is the human that's wrong. It's the thing that's deformed. And that place of uncanny valley that has been caused by a dark thing happening, something that was selfish, something that was cruel, something that was, fundamentally, incredibly, a very human moment that has just been blown up to sort of epic horror proportions. For me, that's where the real juice in horror comes. That's what I want to, sounds awful. That's what I want to do to my villains in order to kick off a horror campaign, is traumatize them horribly in a very human way and then set them loose on the world and see what happens, which is incidentally what I did in Because of the Lich Queen. But, and as I was reading through because I, of course, when I was writing for Night Hunters, I got a lot of sample pages, and I got, sample pages of the iconic villains, and every single one of them had this very tragic backstory, in fact, when you dig into it. So I think that when we approach crafting horror adventures, we need to think a lot about the player experience, which you guys have spoken so eloquently of. But I think we can't forget that little dose of tragedy, actually. They're very tragic human stories from the villain's perspective that, of course, the villain isn't always redeemed. They are often redeemed. It's very exciting. But I think
sometimes the only way to redeem them was with a stake through Dracula. I mean, there's no redemption.
End it.
End it, and that's the happy ending.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's one of the things that gives that tension in horror and creates, so much interest. Yes. What about the world building? Because, you spoke so eloquently about, the presence of good and evil, and how that's something that's very, very useful when you're setting up these horror games. What other kinds of structures and details can you add to your setting to really set up those horror vibes?
For me, I think the number one thing is you have to have a little mystery. You have to have some mystery to make horror effective. I think I can't really think of a single horror example where we started off knowing everything, right, and then walking into it. And so mystery, the feeling that there are things happening that you don't understand but are just at the edge of your perception. And you can do this as simply as, hey, the environment here is foggy. It's a perpetual, misty world, right? Using things like darkness, setting stories in the light of the full moon. But you can also do things like, hey, you come into this village and everybody is acting a little strange, right? Like leaving those hints, those little breadcrumbs all over the place is so important. So when you're world building, you have to think about, what are the locations that have been touched by this strangeness? How can we take expectations and subvert them in small ways to start with, and then it becomes clearer and clearer what is going on?
Yeah, I think That's all absolutely correct. Undermining expectations and a touch of mystery. For me in tabletop, the challenge in horror world building is, unlike film or a novel even, your world building in a tabletop horror game that lasts more than a session or three is maintaining that heart of darkness in daylight, right? Because all too often it's a misty village, it's the moonrise, it's nighttime, and it's short term in a narrative. But for an RPG, something has to be creepy in daylight, right? So the example I like to pull is actually from film. For those who've seen Midsummer, you go out and it's a party, right? Everyone's got a festival going on and meeting some new people, and then it's an excursion outside the working world, and it's a daylight event until there's sort of the quite shocking death of a couple of characters, and you realize we're in the wrong village, right? We have made a terrible turn. We don't know where we are. Everything's bright and sunny, but there's blood all over the ground. And those sorts of world building where it's like, we thought we knew a bright, shining world, but right below it, and this is where the mystery is, right? Like, you've just gone under the surface slightly, and it's bloody, blood and bone, and someone is plotting evilly, some villain. So that kind of darkness is great. I also think it's nice to get out of the village. If you can do horror in a big city, I think there's plenty of room for that, right?
So much.
There's
in the
so
real
much
world and fantasy.
Right. Well, they've got food and culture and wealth and big buildings and all these great things of the metropolis. But then at the same time, there's corruption and power and, cruelty and deadly authorities who have minions galore. So doing a horror world building in a big city is also a fun challenge.
Yeah, I think anywhere you can show suffering, like as this is happening too, and in cities, I feel like that's even easier to do. In villages, it's kind of like, oh, community, everything's fine, but showing suffering, showing the oppression, showing the results of some big horror that is happening.
Some big villain.
Screen,
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's a really fun thing they do in, I'm going to quote an RPG that is a computer game, but you could absolutely easily transfer this to the tabletop. In the Solstheim area of Skyrim, there's this island that's sort of controlled by an eldritch entity. Spoiler alert. It's been out a while now. I think we're fine.
It's okay. I think Skyrim's been around.
You're forgiven.
I think you're okay. We're past the international spoilers line on that one. And essentially, everybody is normal until you ask a certain question, and then they all have really creepy responses. And even in daytime, you'll walk around, and there'll be like a sudden trigger, and everyone starts acting really weirdly, and then it stops again. And it's, those are the kinds of things that you can do even in daylight. You can really infiltrate it into, figure out in advance what are the PC responses going to be. Like, to your point, both of you, this idea of the known and the unknown, the thing that is seen and the thing that is unseen. And it instantly creates that uncanny valley sense where something is wrong. Oh no, but now we're all fine again.
So happy to see you. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And
Ooh,
these are
suddenly.
Yeah, exactly. And these are the kinds of things where you can absolutely mess with your players, or only give one of them the information. But we're getting more into tabletop play rather than world building. But it trickles down, I think. So speaking of that, actually, what about elements of mechanics? Because obviously when we're doing top level, when we're doing planning, you can bring in things like mechanics as bolt-ons that will create more of a sense of horror in a system that isn't horror. I know that Night Hunters has some of these. Can you tell us a little bit about like what you introduce and how it works? Like what are the ends that it brings to your table?
Sure. I would love to talk about shadow tokens for a moment. Have you heard the word?
Yes, please.
So in Night Hunters, we do, because I think a lot of people, they struggle with horror at their table, right? When they're trying to make a high fantasy game work, like how do you get the players to go along with it, right? When you can be so big and heroic and shiny, how do you curb those expectations? How do you facilitate a different kind of experience? And I think player buy-in is really at the heart of it, what you really need for horror. You need your players to want their characters to be scared, to be pulled into the darkness, right? So they can rise again. So to help with that, we introduce a new mechanic in Night Hunters called shadow tokens, which are essentially, there is a pool of these shadow tokens that players can earn by basically buying into those moments of horror. So this might be things like, okay, your character, you're investigating this house, whatever, one of the characters intentionally chooses to split off from the party and go by themselves down to investigate the basement, right? You might award them a shadow token for doing so because, in most high fantasy games, everyone knows, no, don't split the party, oh, that's not safe, that's not
don't do that.
But if you decide to buy into the fun of horror, right, and put your character in that risky position, you can be awarded with one of these tokens. And tokens can be traded in to cancel out things like, maybe like a legendary action from a villain. You can use a token to suppress that, or you could get a reroll if you have a certain number of tokens. So you get mechanical benefits for basically narrative buy-in to the horror genre. And we even took this a step further because we have the base ways, recommendations, ways you can earn these tokens and spend these tokens. But we also have things called dread villains in this book, which are larger than life, meant to be the big final boss, right? With all of these schemes and minions and plots. And each one of them has specific ways you can earn shadow tokens by, buying into their schemes or, engaging with them in these ways that put you at risk. But then you also have specific ways you can use those tokens to overcome those villains, right? So like one of mine is like a sentient murder house, right? Is one of the dread villains that we have in here. And over time, doing things like looking into mirrors, listening to the whispers from the shadows, right, will earn you those tokens, but you can pool them together to sanctify a room within the house to basically give you a long rest. Otherwise, trapped inside, it's going to be tough. So shadow tokens are our big move to get that engagement, to help players understand what it is about horror that is fun and engage with it and introduce that element of risk, especially that at higher level gameplay and high fantasy. Often GMs struggle to introduce those stakes.
If your players buy in, then you're golden, right? Yeah. Because what you want is players who know enough horror to say, okay, I'm going to read the Latin out loud.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to share with the rest of the party what it says. I'm going to read it out loud again. No, don't read that out loud twice. Right? Yeah. That is the player who you want to reward.
Yeah.
And shadow tokens help you do that.
Yeah. Another favorite example of shadow tokens, I think it was Kendo who thought of it. He was like, so what I could do is as the GM, I could say to my players, okay, it's long rest time. Who is willing to have like a spooky nightmare or like a vision from the house, right? And you ask your players, and whoever says yes, you could give them a shadow token, right, as a reward, and then they get a strange prophetic dream or whatever it is. So it's really an active tool as well for GMs to guide and storytell, these great elements of horror.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the key points you mentioned there is the kind of the genre savviness of the players, like encouraging them to buy in. And I love that point from Kendo, where you can guide them if they're not necessarily genre savvy. You can present opportunities where, like,
it's how you
somebody could get a shadow token if they ... And you leave the opportunity open, and if they want to take it, they take it. I think in the adventure I wrote, I offered them a shadow token if they explored a room they didn't have to.
Yes.
So there are a few rooms within the theatre they didn't have to go into, but if they went in and explored them, then they'd get a shadow token.
Which helps them understand more of the mystery of what's going on, right? And helps them engage with the story in the best, most fun way.
Yeah, it's a very different mechanic than the way Call of Cthulhu does it. And of course, Cthulhu is a horror RPG to begin with. Yeah. But there, it's the spiral into madness, where you're just spending a resource that you start high, and the game ends or your character's line ends when that's gone. This is a resource that comes in and goes out over time. There's an ebb and flow to shadow tokens that there isn't to something like the sanity mechanic in Cthulhu.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And I think the sanity mechanic is much more more integral, and you can't take it out. That's the other thing. Players can't opt out of it. Whereas what I like about the shadow tokens is that players can opt out if they're not feeling brave, or if someone's a little bit newer or a little bit more cautious, and other people can opt in. And I think that's really exciting, particularly for people who haven't played horror before, GMs who haven't played horror before. There's a lot more, ironically, lower character agency but higher player agency in a lot of these situations, which I think is actually perfect for horror. It really, really works well. What about plot? Now, we talked about, what are RPG adventures all about when they're about horror, but how can you reflect this in plot? We've talked a lot about investigation, so that might be a good place to start. What do you think?
Investigations are a classic because, people are disappearing in the village and sheep keep getting half eaten and left out on the moors. And, what could it possibly be?
Or something is wrong with your friend. Each night you notice something is a little bit more different about them, right? And so that kind of that slow burn. Yeah.
Right. Like, there's only so many horror plots, investigation being one. Hey, somebody's killing all the kids is another. In tabletop, one of the joys of it is sometimes there's just a villain doing villain things, and you don't really know the plot until they monologue at the end, right? Like, they're doing bad things. They're, all their black goats have learned to talk. It's bad. But you don't know why. And that kind of unease and mystery can be fun. A fairly lightly plotted adventure is just, we know he's a vampire and we're going to meet him eventually. But in the meantime, we're exploring all this creepy stuff, right? I'm reluctant to overplot horror all the time because sometimes the players just want to poke at the, zombie horde or survival is the level of plot we're talking about. But yeah, Celeste, I know you plot a little more tightly, and I don't know.
Yeah. So I was going to say, actually, I was like, I think there have to be stages baked into your plot, right? More perhaps than other kinds of adventure. You have to pay attention to, you have to have a clear setup, you have to have that confrontation moment, and you have to have the resolution. And
but the muddle in the middle can be dragged out for a long time.
It can, but you have to be sure to reward along the way, right? You can't have, you're playing a tricky game as a GM because you want your players to start in a position where they're like, oh man, this is a serious threat, either because we don't know, or we know it's too powerful, or, we don't have the tools we need yet. Right? You start there, and then you have to give them steps along the way, because they have to have, in high fantasy, you have to have those moments of victory, little victories that lead up to build.
We found the sun sword. Yeah. Oh, we prayed at the statue of the saint, and we got something.
We cleared this one haunted house, right? Maybe the whole town is haunted, but hey, we did one, or you defeat a lieutenant monster is a really great.
And the lieutenant
so there's those sort of hierarchy steps.
Yes, tells you the secret weakness or the
it's like climb the ladder of mooks, and then you figure out who the big vampire is. Another one that I like is
he's just a puppet. Oh, there must be a puppet master.
Yeah, exactly. Collect the tokens is another one that I like.
Plot tokens.
Yeah, you need a certain number of them to dispel the such and such, and therefore we must collect the plot tokens, and each of those is a different kind of challenge. I feel like that's very solid as a general approach, because the players understand the gradation and the progress.
Yes.
It's the kind of 1 of 4, 2 of 4, 3 of 4, and then you can subvert that and be like, oh, look, we found 4 of 4 as we were looking for 3 of 4. Things have moved faster than we were expecting. It's a very nice way of helping players feel progress and then accelerating, essentially.
Yeah, because the great issue with horror often is you do throw them in, they do feel somewhat adrift, and I've seen this time after time in horror games where it's like, well, what do we do now? We've done the library research, we've asked a few questions, we poked at the body in the morgue. Now we're stumped. Right?
Yeah.
So
I think, planning those beats, so you don't have those moments, is really important. When you sit down to outline, even if it's just a single section, have your big moments, right? We call them powder kegs at Kobold Press. Have those little plot moments, that thing that happens, right? So you're like, okay, I know that they have 3 avenues of investigation. When we get to the second one, I'm gonna have something happen. Zombies crash through the wall, right? Like, it can even be as simple as that. Having those moments, because orchestrating horror and being a horror GM is a little bit more challenging, I would say, than typical, because you have to sense the moments, right? And that's what, like, watching horror movies is so great for this, right? You can tell, you're like, okay, but things have been good for too long. Something is about to happen. Something is about, and then it does, right? Like, playing and paying attention to where your players are at and how they're engaging with the story and being ready to have all the lights shut off, or, you know, the knock on the door, or the storm rolls in, right? This is so critical to plotting out horror, those moments where the game changes.
Yeah,
where you
absolutely.
hear the big musical sting in your head.
Yeah. We will talk about tips and tricks you can use at the table, and I think music is going to be one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk briefly about this, because this is something that can undo the best GM, and I think a prepared GM is a GM who knows that there is a player who has divination, or a player who can see everything, true sight or something.
There are traditional answers to this in horror, and they are almost the same answers as they are in murder mystery plotting, right?
Yeah.
Where high fantasy means, oh, I can speak to the dead, so I know who killed the victim because they'll tell me.
Yeah.
Or I can find the missing sacred object because I have a spell that will tell me where the object is. It just short circuits everything. I think the answers come in 3 or 4 different flavors. One is to sort of know it ahead of time, acknowledge it, think through, oh, my players have these abilities, and work around it. I think the answers are deny the powers, provide false information, and provide layers of information. So by which I mean, so if you're removing powers, like, suddenly your divination doesn't work because dark forces are working against you, right? Which feels like a removal of player agency, but you're also saying this is the dark environment you're in. Fiends, powers of darkness, and if described by the game master correctly, right? Like, it's not you can't use your powers, it's someone else is fighting you for it, right? The vampire is trying to control the NPC you're questioning. Their eyes keep drifting away. You know, there's a resistance. False information is just what it is, right? The vampire lord makes the NPC lie to you. And
or the NPC really doesn't know. The corpse, you know, thinks this person killed them, but humans
Right?
are unreliable, so are
Or
probably
they
dead,
didn't see.
confused. Yeah, they didn't see.
Yeah.
They thought I
Yeah.
did. They hated the guy next door, so they said the guy next door, even though they didn't see who attacked them.
It
in the
wasn't
dark,
him,
right?
right? And then
Yeah.
you get those layers of information where you get part of the answer and it's sort of true, but the villagers don't trust you, right? Like, they know the werewolf is the mayor, but they need the mayor, or they don't trust you to get it right. So they kind of just tell you, yeah, move along, right? It'll be fine. So,
Or I think the only thing I would add on that is, or make raise the price, right? Raise the price, the cost of having to do these things, right? So when you were talking about player mechanics, just like you were saying, Wolfgang, I think in horror, it's very important to pay attention to what is going on your players' character sheets, and just to know what's up there, especially if you don't want to ban options or, you know, whatever it is. Keep an eye on what is there so you know what tools they are likely to use. And then you should plan things to reward those tools rather than just rather than just saying, oh, no, whatever. But you can do that. In session 0, you can, as long as everybody knows ahead of time before they make their characters that the divination spell is never going to work. That's fine. They know to
or it's twisted. Yeah.
Right. Or, you can talk about this cost thing that you can say. You could be like, right there at the beginning of the story, be like, hey, this is a land of obfuscated magic and strange things. So divination spells, or like identify things like this, can work, but they're more difficult. Or maybe this is an opportunity where we also have something for the Kickstarter that's a spirit board that is an alternate way to use shadow tokens. So you can actually have them all out and you can flip them to the villain side or to the heroes. So it might be one of those instances saying, hey, you can do this, but the villain is going to get 5 shadow tokens on their side if this happens. Do you want to do that? Do you want to pay the price? And then that's very like a cool and fun way to approach that in horror.
Yeah. All great ideas. But what I'm really hearing is you do need to think about these things.
You do.
When information is part of plot currency,
yes,
you need to make sure that you know that how the players can get hold of information, because otherwise you're going to shoot yourself in the foot and they're going to be like, oh, I know exactly who the vampire is. So you're going to be there, go 8 sessions.
You really need to pay attention to what tools your villain has at their disposal. This is something I always get questions about. How do you run high-powered gameplay? How do you deal with this? Your villains also have access to this magic. There are spells that counter divination. Of course, this lich would put, wards on their lair so you cannot see what is going on. You have to pay attention to all the many tools, regional effects, lair actions, legendary actions, allies, spell casting that your villains have, and use them. Make the players feel like they are actually up against these kind of high magic challenges.
Sure, if it's an evil archmage, counter spells are going to be part of what they need, right? Like it's going to be part of it.
Non-detection all the time. Put it on an amulet. There you go.
Yes.
Always been non-detecting. I'm so ready.
Wards, they have time for it,
They do.
Yeah, their mooks are all doing the washing up thing. They've got nothing but time.
Heroes are running around leveling up. I've got nothing but time.
Right, there we are. So you mentioned the Ouija board, and I feel like this is a great moment to get into props, because horror is something that really does lend itself to a little bit of stagecraft, a little bit of, trickery, props, those kinds of things. What can we use to bring a little bit of extra horror vibe to the table in that kind of physical space, the stagecraft space?
Well, I think the spirit board with the shadow tokens on it that we mentioned is something in Night Hunters that brings a lot of sort of spooky flavor, and it kind of puts the stakes and the points and the resources right on the table for everyone to see. There's no, does the villain have them? Do we have, who has shadow tokens? It's right out in front. The other thing that Night Hunters has that's very flavorful as a prop is the Shadow Oracle deck, which is an fully illustrated set of major arcana in the tarot style. But even spookier than the tarot deck, right? So there are cards like Death and Fortune, but there's also a Lord and Lady that are, I think, a ghoul and a ghost. No, the lover.
The ghost is the lover cradling
the ghost
the
is the
skull.
lover. But any kind of those fortune-telling card decks, and I think the Shadow Oracle one from Night Hunters is especially pretty. They add a nice tone of, well, here's your fate, right? Draw 3 cards, present or past, present, future, or however you want to do a reading in the game. It also comes with a small mini game called Shadow Jack, so you can play the Shadow Oracle deck for about it's a quick 15-minute card game that is sort of an in-world card game, but then you're looking at all these spooky cards while you're dealing a hand and maybe trying to get information from an NPC. So it's a nice flavorful piece that you can put out, and everybody knows, a tarot deck, a deck of cards. We have some idea of what we're getting into narratively. But even beyond the Night Hunters props, my goodness, you can go to town just with, goblet full of red Kool-Aid. You don't have to get too spooky.
Those LED candles, the ones that look like they flicker when you really. I always love to do that for at least once a year on Halloween. Often more, set up like low lighting and flames and finding that perfect playlist, the atmospheric playlist that you can have on in the background, or if you want to pick a song, like I had like a castle adventure I did, and this ghost had a very beautiful and haunting violin piece that whenever the ghost drew near, I would switch into that and layer it in. And obviously, there are so many great tools if you're playing virtually as well for sound modification. So
Oh
I would
goodness,
say,
yes.
if you're remote, sound is going to be huge.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
absolutely.
too, beyond props, I think for atmosphere at the table for horror, it is really important to recognize your players are human and things can't be doom and gloom all the time. You need some time to get the silly out. So I would say to create like atmosphere, make sure you have plenty of time for everybody to meet and like converse and catch up on their life and have some snacks before you actually start the game, right? And make some kind of clear indication when the game is starting. This could be rolling out, you know, the spirit board, or this could be, you know, turning on the playlist, or maybe you make a dramatic, you know, 2-sentence summary of what happened last time and you use your spooky voice, you know. Making
You
those moments
play
make
the
it
big organ
clear.
chord. Yes,
Yes.
have the moment.
Yeah, when the movie is starting, right? Like we need to know. So building in those theatrical, I think, event kind of management moments is very important for atmosphere. And taking breaks, scheduling them so people know when to be on and when to be off, like that they can lower the tension, because you know, an hour and a half in, we're gonna get the pizza, and that'll help your players focus on being scared, right? For 90 minutes, if they know it's 90 minutes.
They
Yeah,
want to be scared, but the right kind of scared,
Yeah.
and not being in
scared they
tension
won't
for
get pizza.
3 hours without a relief is
It's a lot to
a
ask of anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like if you're hungry for too long, you just sort of stop being hungry. If you're,
Yeah.
you know, afraid for too long, you just sort of stop being
The
afraid. After a
chemicals
while,
run
it just,
out
it just
in your brain.
ebbs. Yeah, exactly. Your brain just kind of like kicks in the homeostasis. Like, okay, we're not dead yet. Probably it's fine. We're okay, and you feel it less. So I think that for sure, like, you know, you mentioned soundtracks, and I think another great thing could be like little SFX, like sound effects, just to have like, you know, little music and then a sudden scream can be super effective, like at the table or virtually. But then, you know what, sometimes bring up the lights and have like slightly more chill music, so you signal like this is a more chill scene.
Yeah.
And then you can use those hard cuts as well. It's like suddenly you hear a scream, and then suddenly it all gets very dark and creepy, and you're indicating that change. And I think that, to your point, that could be very effective for, like, you know, this was a spooky scene, and now we're going to have a less spooky scene, so we can chill and have a few laughs and eat some chips, and then suddenly it's going to get spooky and tense again, and we feel it more.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that props are
Pacing.
really,
It's player buy-in and pacing, the keys to horror. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are the kinds of things that you know, you really can plan. Like
Yeah.
you can totally, like, if you're absolutely an impro GM, you can impro these things, but you can also plan them, or plan cues, or even just plan, like, you know, 2 moods, so that you know that, you know, when the zombies hit the fan, that's the moment when, you know, things are going to get more serious. These are my thoughts anyway, but I love the idea of this Oracle deck. I'm just so here for it.
Oh yeah. We have some samples up on the
We also,
Kickstarter, and
built in some options too with that too. There are lots of ways to get it into the game, so we actually have a space for it on the spirit board if you want to, you know, so you can have the deck sitting there and then flip over to the discard, right, or whatever, and that is the card for the game, and some suggestions on how that could even modify what is happening in the encounter or the environment. Or we say things like, hey, instead of like normal augury, right, that gives you a, you know, a wheel or woe, you as the GM could look through the major arcana and like, what does that mean, right? When the players you flip over the tower, what does that mean? You know, it's a lot of fun moments to set up for sure.
What I love about this is that we've talked about all of the spaces. We've talked about, you know, the creepy sounds for the exploration. We talked about the card game for the social encounters. But what about combat encounters? Combat encounters can so often become, you know, I hit you, and then you hit me, and then I hit you, and it feels very not horror. So what are some tips and tricks to really prep and build in that atmosphere so that your combat encounters also feel like they're coming from a horror movie?
Well, I have 2 that I go back to time and again. One of them is straight out of 4th edition D&D, namely the minion rule there, which is One hit and they're down.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done this in a zombie survival game where all the zombies are one hit and you're down, right? Like that's great because what I just told them is there are 40 zombies and everybody panics, right? Oh, it's your minion trick. We know your tricks. But I'm like, but it's still 40 zombies. The other one then, because that feels in a horror sense like, oh, you're big darn heroes and you're knocking aside mooks right and left. So it's a little, it's more in the zombie mode than the vampire, right? It's from dusk till dawn. It's Walking Dead. It's that kind of thing. The other trick is you think you know what the villain is, but you don't, right? So transforming villains, they look like humans until they don't. And this is a trope of horror where, again, it's the unknown, the mystery. You think you're dealing with a shopkeeper. And the reveal into combat, I usually use a surprise round mechanically, right? It's like you think it's the shopkeeper, but he's really the werewolf. Rawr! And it's not roll for initiative. It's you didn't know he was the werewolf, and he gets a surprise round mechanically. So everybody goes, wait a minute, nobody ever uses surprise rounds. Well, guess what? You didn't know he was
Tales of the Valiant. Guess what?
Right? Tales of Valiant is actually better about it than many flavors, right? So I think surprise in horror, it sort of reproduces the jump scare or that first rush of combat.
Yeah. I mean, definitely on that. I was gonna say, right out the gate, you got to keep it punchy, faster,
Yes.
fast and furious is the way to go with horror. I mean, think about Alien. A guy is ripped apart in seconds, right? The first time we ever don't even see the alien, in the movie. Right, like that, like, oh my god, like all of a sudden, the villain, surprised, comes out of the wall, breaks someone's neck, 50 HP, or drop, like that kind of like, like the mania, the panic, the anxiety of it. These are your best tools, and plan for it. Plan only 3 rounds of combat. Yep. Plan how that is going to happen. Like, what are the big swings? Take the biggest and demand your players also take the biggest action, right? Harder they hit, harder they fall. Planning for these kind of things. And then also planning ahead of time for combat. You need to shake up the combat formats.
Yes.
You need to pay attention to, was the last, encounter they did, a swarm of fighting 20 zombies and that just suddenly broke through the door, right? Like, that's so cool. That's definitely a style. And then maybe next time you have something slowly stalking them, or it's an invisible target that only attacks, one character until they try to find it. You need to pay attention to these things and shake it up. So, because the moment they expect what is happening, that's when horror loses a lot of its power.
Yeah, nothing's worse than like, oh my god, it's our 4th zombie horde.
Wow,
like,
you rolled a random encounter zombie again.
Right. Yeah. Whereas if you do change it up, I love the flavor, the layer cake of combat flavors you just suggested. Celeste is really nice, right? Like, here's the ghost phasing through walls. Here's the mass of zombies. Here's the, oh my goodness, he's got all kinds of crazy tricks. He's a flying vampire spellcaster, right? That's so.
Or have a chase encounter. Go to the Game Master's Guide and, have them run from something or to something, or introduce a challenge where the environmental hazard is the big problem. So use something like, oh my gosh, like we came into this room and one of the hazards we have in this book, we have a ton of new hazards, curses, traps. It's hungering bones, where it's just like skeletal remains that fill a floor, and they're basically trying to drag you down, into a quicksand pit, to into their misery. So if crossing that is the big problem, and you just have some little guys like attacking you from above, like that, all of a sudden, those components have become a pretty intense fight.
Yeah, absolutely. The one I would add maybe is also make sure they don't get a good look at the monster all at once.
Yeah.
Add some mist, add some cover.
The world's biggest cloak.
Just a very large hat.
It's a very large hat.
But it's such a trope of horror, and it's so hard to do in RPGs, but it is possible to Celeste's point, don't keep doing it, but like have a room with really thick mist in, and there's something creepy that you can hear and you can't see it.
So your villains, if you have your main villain, do not have them fight it right away. In the first encounter with this villain should never be the final encounter, right? If you really want them to be something. So they appear, I don't know, in a vision to talk to the players, right? Or in a dream, or you fight their minions first and you know at the end they are coming. So telegraph, but don't give it all away. One of the things I love about, Curse of Strahd, if we're talking about great, Gothic horror adventures, is the fact that it says Strahd does show up. Absolutely, but he always runs away, in the first couple of rounds, like really early before the characters can fight him, because villains can't help themselves. They can't help but toy with their prey. They can't help but show how powerful they are. Let them do it. Let the players see all of this. It'll give much more weight and power to that moment when they finally bring them down.
And frankly, I'll add to that by saying, monologuing as the villain, as the game master, is a fun moment for the game master, right?
Let your game master do the monologue.
Yes, come on, he's up on a balcony. I shoot him with the bow. He's already prepared a protective spell. Let me monologue. He's got scenery to chew, people. Just give me 1 minute.
Again, and hopefully with things like shadow tokens and player buy-in, you've trained your players to be aware of those moments, right? By the time you get to it, and they will realize it would be more fun if we heard the story.
Right? Like the bard might say, I kind of want him to tell us his plan because we don't really know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're playing horror, right? We're playing horror because we want to enjoy those moments. We want to enjoy the tropes in many ways.
You can be upfront with your players. If you're training them, you don't have to count on them to read your mind. You can't say, I'm going to monologue for a minute here, right? Yeah. You can say, the villain's going to show up in this game, but you may not catch him, right? Yeah. Don't be disappointed.
And this is so helpful for horror. Again, going back to the sentient murder house villain, one of the things we say right at the beginning is, hey, before your players walk in, tell them they will be trapped in this house for a certain number of games. Yes, of course, you could probably, say, oh, well, I have a 5th circle spell that would let me teleport out. But if everybody knows they're going to be trapped in the house, so get your resources now, and we're going to be trapped in there for 3 sessions, everyone's like, okay, cool. And then they're usually fine with that, right? But it feels bad if into session 2, they're like, well, I want to leave to what? And then you're like, no, you can't. Be open, be honest. It works really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it will still be scary, but you will have set up player expectations.
It'll be scary because of the story, not because of the bad feeling.
That brings up this topic.
Oh, there you go. Exactly. That brings us neatly to trust and safety. I think for me, we want the characters to be afraid and traumatized. We want the players to be having fun, whatever that means. So how can we sort of set that up? And do you have Night Hunters tools for that?
Yeah. So, Night Hunters, we talk a lot about, obviously, session 0. If you're doing a long-term horror campaign or a horror game that's going to be more than a one-shot, you really, really need to have a great, thorough session 0, where you sit down and you talk about your characters together, because making characters that are going to be good for horror requires, once again, you have to have some things in your background, right? And your stories. Certain stories work great and really help you have a lot more fun in horror. So that's one of those things, talking about your expectations for characters too. Also talking, frankly, as a GM, what your expectations are around behavior, and, maybe saying okay, yeah, we are always going to meet 30 minutes early so we can get the giggles out and do the thing, and we'll take lots of breaks. Be really candid about setting the stage for that. We also have a lot of conversations in this book talking specifically to, obviously, about identifying lines and triggers, because a lot of very scary stuff can come up in horror, and you need to know what is the thing for each of your players that is just the no-go. Don't worry, don't be scared about this, because there are so many scary things in the world. I promise you can avoid, rats if that's what it is. But you have to have that, because you can feel safe as a GM too, to really get gross or really, you know, dig into this kind of theme, if you know that everybody is cool with it. Part of that too, we do say identify the genre of horror you're kind of going to be going
this
for.
is big.
Because if you really want to run a body horror campaign, you want some Frankenstein stuff going on, you need to be clear about that, because there could be a player that's like, nope, like don't watch the Saw movies, so gross. No, absolutely not.
So
you have
very
to be clear
briefly, can you run us through the different kinds of horror, and just so our GMs know sort of the basic checklist?
Yeah. Wolfgang, you got the...
Do I have the checklist open? I don't. Well, there's body horror, there's psychological horror, there's survival horror.
Cosmic horror is a big one.
Thank you.
I mean,
Cool,
grimdark
vibes
is also something you probably need to be aware of. So yeah, grimdark, when everything is grim and bleak and low powered and like, you know, very oppressive atmosphere. Body horror, yeah, there's gonna be a lot of hacking and slashing and
guts and blood,
and guts and corpses, right? And then cosmic horror, yeah, that from beyond, very like psychological, mental
mind
stuff.
melting, oppressive.
Yeah, and a lot of like illusions and, you know, subverting expectations. You got like folk horror, which is a lot about like isolation and being alone in these scary places and these monsters that, you know, have these long legacies and histories and sort of a cryptid kind of vibe. Lots of different layers, and we talk a lot about identifying kind of horror and then how you can blend things, because you don't have to pick a main genre. But usually each adventure or each main villain will have, you can clearly identify kind of the genre here. Oh, and then gothic horror, of course, which is like the dark, romantic,
classic, brooding
tragic,
vampires.
Yeah, human tragedy is huge, right?
Curses, ghosts.
Yeah. Looking at them as tools to help you explain what you're going for and set expectations.
Right, and if you've agreed on a genre with your players, everybody's expectations sort of align, and if someone has a special concern, it's easier to address. And they can play to the tropes and stereotypes if they know what you're aiming for.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, I think that's all we have time for today. I hope that you feel more equipped to run a game, or at least consider running a horror game. And I will say, completely unbiasedly, that I had the pleasure of reading a lot of the Night Hunters material as I was writing the adventure that I wrote for it. And it is an absolute pleasure. I was so inspired. I cannot recommend it enough as a giant bundle of tools to help you run cool horror in D&D.
Yes.
It is fully D&D compatible, D&D 5e, and also Tales of the Valiant. So there's also horror comedy, says Wordy Girl. Yes, absolutely.
True.
Absolutely.
We get enough of those already.
Evil Dead, that's basically just a normal game session.
That's every
right?
every TTRPG has its comedy. But yes, horror comedy. Rom-coms.
Shaun of the Dead.
Shaun of the Dead. Yes.
Absolutely. Do you feel like Night Hunters could be run as comedy horror?
It would be hard. There's a lot of scary stuff. We really put a lot of scary and mean stuff in this book.
With the right players.
Good luck.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it can.
It can happen. We have one audience question I'm just going to sneak in, which is... can lethality be inflicted without TPK? Is essentially the essence of this one. How can you instigate and show lethality without just wiping out your players?
Yeah, this is the old paranoia, you've got 5 clones kind of thing. I love this, and I've had entire campaigns that weren't even starting as horror, where I said, roll up 2 characters, you might need a backup, which told my players how I was going to run it. I absolutely think that the funnel style can work, but you need to have players who are okay with losing that character. If they're going to be very precious about their first character, then it's not for them, right?
Yeah, I feel like this works really well for like the first tier of play, so level 1st to 4th. But by the time you get out of that, people are really attached to their characters.
Yeah.
It literally takes longer to sit down and make a character at a higher level, so the investment is higher. But I think this is a great, super fun, hey, session 1 of our horror campaign, let's shake off the dust. Everybody make a couple of characters. Extremely lethal. Werewolf attack.
Yeah, we ought to do this at a convention game. We ought to hand everybody 3 characters and say,
Call
well,
it a meat grinder.
Right, a meat grinder. It's 4 hours. You're going to need 3 characters.
Guys, an idea was born right here, and I cannot wait to see it. Can't wait to see it in action. Very excited. Well, folks, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Love being here.
Hooray! It's been an absolute pleasure. And guys, if you want to keep the party going, we are going on a raid. Our raid shout is Light Up the Forge, so shout it out as we go over to Wordy Girl, who is getting on with her New Year's resolutions challenge. Yes, we have a challenge right now to figure out what our priorities are for the year. What are we working on? It's all going down over at Wordy Girl's channel, so you can check that out right now. And we will be back next week, I believe. She says, double checking. No, in 2 weeks, we will be back with the World Ember Awards ceremony. So make sure you don't miss that. But next week, we are going from RPGs to writing, and we're going to be talking all about writing romantasy, getting it well built, making it work. As somebody who has sold a romantasy story that fixed everything I thought was wrong with A Crown of Thorns and Roses, I can say this is a topic close to my heart. So we're going to be unpacking this in great detail with the amazing H. Lisa Dixon next week. So I hope to see some of you there. And for all of you, make sure that you grab your hammer and go world build. Bye, guys.